Okay. Hi, I'm Al Shalloway. A lot of you know me already. I recognize your names anyway. Not everybody, but most of you. We're going to learn a new board. This is one of the Miro boards I talk a lot about. I'm very excited about the use of Miro boards in training and in coaching and in consulting. It's been a revelation to me from about, well, actually, it's 4 years old. I mean, I learned about them when Joshua Barnes showed me how to do something I had created as a kind of on the table live thing, and he said he could do it in a interactive way. And to be candid, I didn't really believe him. But I said, okay, well, let's give it a shot. And it was impressive. And in fact, a month from now, we're going to use that board. It's called the we call it the dot game. And it's actually in an hour, you can teach basic agile with it. And that's going to be the next one up. It's very cool. These boards we do here, we also give away. Our policy in terms of which Miro boards we give away, it's about a third of them, it's not all of them, are when we've taken something and have kind of extended it. If it's our own original idea, we don't always give it away. This is kind of my own original idea, but I thought this was easy enough to use and important enough to use that I would give it away. So anyway, I'm going to explain it a little bit, give the history of it. I'm with Success Engineering, and you might say, well, then why does that say Success Mentors? Success Mentors U is a joint collaboration between myself, Success Engineering, and Joshua Barnes, Process Mentor. So we just kind of concatenated the names. And we teach different workshops, but we used to teach the Discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant together. I'm actually I've stopped doing that, and I'm going to announce that in the next few days. But we're very synergistic together, very like-minded, and we both have a lot of the training philosophy. I developed the DA VSC, and he was the first instructor in it. So we have a lot of common knowledge, and we're building content based on flow, lean theory of constraints. Anyway, right now I intend you to kind of more watch the board, but I have put in, because I recognize most everybody, and I'm trying an experiment a little bit here. I was kind of Shanghai a couple of weeks ago, and I've got some controls in place, but mostly I'm going to hope that was just a one-off. And if I do get anybody creating nonsense, I have a way to make it so everybody's muted and can't unmute, and I'll take away, move the board. So hopefully everybody behaves this time. I think it was just a bunch of teenagers last time and not a real targeting. Anyway, I put in the chat a link to this board where you can change it, and you can look, but don't do anything just yet. Okay, I'll explain how, and I'll explain how to use a Miro board. This board is set up a particular way. All of our boards are set up a particular way. You should have come in with something looking like this, except you probably have it looking like this. Okay, now don't worry if this is how you came in. What you want to do is look here on the bottom left. See where it says open sidebar? If it's already open like this, then don't do anything. You're good. If it's like this, then just do what I just did. See, put the cursor there, click, and opens the sidebar. And what this does is, see, I've set this up with frames. See, I can navigate through the board. It's pretty cool. I have a love-hate relationship with Miro. I'm going to zoom back so you can see this is the whole board. That's what's cool about it. You can put everything you want here. I've got much bigger boards than this. But when you click on one like this, it's a nice way to navigate. You can also navigate up like a PowerPoint presentation with one of these commands, but I'm not going to do that. So let me give you a little history of the challenges board. This is what I call the challenges board. And let me give you a little history. It's funny how there's a lot of stuff that was gained and lost back 20 years ago, and a lot of stuff that should have been lost that's still with us. It's kind of weird, the dogma and what I call cognitive inertia, where we just keep doing the same things. Like planning poker, we did it a couple times ago on how to do team estimation. In my mind, is one of the worst ways to estimate. Not team estimation, planning poker is. Team estimation is much better. There is a board in the Amplio community of practice. If you join, that's free. And here I might as well show you how to get there. If you go to Success Engineering, easy, successengineering.works. In a couple of weeks, we have on being an effective value creation coach. By the way, that's a good thing to look at. But if you take learning journeys and then just take the Amplio community practice, actually, I'll just take it from the pull down. This is free to join, and it will get you access to several of these boards, including the one we did last week, which was the Amplio team estimation. It's really team estimation by Steve Bachman. I added some things to it, so I label it Amplio, but it really is Steve Bachman's idea, and I added some variations to it. So that's another board. But anyway, when you come in, and everybody still looks like I'm going to be trusting. Well, actually, here's what you should do. If you, I think we have enough. We're just going to go forward like this. I'm not going to keep interrupting with that. So in the board, here was what happened in the early 2000s. And I don't know if it was part of Scrum or not. I think it was, at least when we taught Scrum. I used to teach a lot of Scrum, 15 years ago. I kind of abandoned Scrum around 2008, 2007, when I had suggested you do better if you thought of Scrum as a implementation of Lean, which Jeff and Ken denied. And they say now it's based on Lean, but it isn't. It hasn't changed. But back in the day, one of the things we had was what we called an impediment list. This was a artifact that everybody used, and it was talked about as part of Scrum. And this was before the Scrum Guide came out. So it may not ever been in the Scrum Guide, but it was definitely something everybody did. And the purpose of the impediment list was to track what happened in the retrospective. So if you said, hey, we're having these problems, or if it came up in a daily Scrum, oh, we're having this problem, the Scrum Master would keep this list of impediments. And the idea was that you would track them until they got removed. And if you kept them up there and they stayed there for a while, that meant these impediments were not being solved. So I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, why don't we have something like this? To me, this should be something that's the job of somebody, whether it's the Scrum Master or whoever's kind of overlooking things. And I came up with a challenges board, and that's really what this is. And this is a board that's intended to discover what your challenges are. It's not to replace the retrospective, but actually could be used in the retrospective. We have retrospective board eventually coming up in the Amplio community practice as well. In fact, I might as well show you that. Well, I've got there, I always forget what I call it though in this. There are two kinds of retrospective boards I've liked to use. I can't find it, of course. Let me just do a quick look. After action review, should have AAR in there. There are two kinds again. So you click down here, you get these. There are two boards that we use. One is that's like this, expect what happened well, what happened less well, what do we want to sustain? And then the other one, which is kind of common, is do more of, do less of, start doing, stop doing. This comes from actually the after action reviews of the military, which are quite good. Anyway, this will be another future board we go into in the Amplio community of practice. So anyway, what this board is, and if you go to the purpose and instructions, I'm not going to read this, I'm just going to talk to you, but this is trying to be a self-contained board. And the idea is originated as one team, okay? And I'll just show you on the screen. Here, let me get rid of this to get a little more space. I'll show you on the screen. I'll explain the stickies to the side. Don't worry about it yet. Was what are the challenges we're having? Okay, now I like to use the word challenges instead of problems. Did I start the recording? Oh my goodness. I did. Thank you. Sorry. Just for some reason I had this panic. So I should improve my process, have a sticky recording started. All I have to do is look at that button. Anyway, the idea was I like challenges because challenges mean something slowing you down. It's like a problem sometimes is something that's perceived as an issue, but it also means you have a solution. So I like what's challenges. If you want to think of it as a problem, that's okay. How can we overcome these? Why aren't we? Well, sometimes we don't know. So sometimes we'll have a challenge, we don't know how to overcome them. Sometimes we can't overcome them because we need somebody's help, or we kind of know what to do, but we don't quite know how to do it. Now, this is ahead of the game. Column 4, see, this is used in the Amplio Development Masterclass, where when we get to this, we talk about principles. And I have that here for reference, mindsets, etc. This is a summary of the principles that drive Amplio. The mindset, the first principles we use. This factors for effective value streams is something I riff off Ellie Goldrat's Inherent Simplicity, where he says a few things at the core cause stuff to happen. So when you learn those principles, you can actually use those almost always. And I do mean almost always, unless it's a human factor, which it often is. But if it's a technical factor, like our stories are too big or we have too many, we can use these. Amplio is based on the idea that they're kind of two interrelated systems working together. So it's really one big system. One system is the people, of course. We're in a complex adaptive system. We can't quite figure out how people are going to do things. That's kind of complex and not predictable. But inside that is the work people are doing. And those follow reasonably consistent rules, like too much work causes a lot of multitasking and extra waste and things like that. So when we're in the workshop, we actually go further and we come up with action. So if you understand the principles, you could go ahead and put things in here. Otherwise, I'm not really worried about that. This is how this works. And in a couple minutes, we're going to, after I'm through describing this, we're going to do it. And I'll show you how that is. So coming back to the purpose and instructions, it's to identify challenges, explore how we might eliminate them, what's in our way, identify any actions we could take, things of that nature. Now, you can imagine doing this as a team. The people are talking about their team. See, this is what actually got kind of exciting. I built this for reason one. Just do it as a team. What's wrong? What's going on? But then I realized, it'd be kind of cool to have multiple teams doing them on the same board, but separately from each other. In other words, if you've got 4 teams in a program, have them all do it at the same time. Why? Or maybe asynchronously. Maybe have one team do this. In other words, you duplicate these. It's easy to copy and paste. And the reason you do this, because I've done a lot of interactive things. And if you've ever done a lot of interactive or games in one big room or something, what you find is people go look, at the other people. Hey, how they doing? That's good cheating, because it's not really competition. So in that sense, having multiple teams just do their own thing in the same room is helpful because people can cross-learn. So we realize, hey, that's cool. But what if you had those multiple teams instead of going on separate boards? What if you had them all on one board talking about the challenges of working together? Oh, that's cool too. And then you could even do this as challenges across an organization and what's troubling with that. So this same board can be used for all 4 of these levels, okay? And that's really what it's designed for. Okay, so here's how this works. Let me get rid of this. And like I say, I'm going to trust there's no nonsense here. So here's this will probably be the last time I do it. That's the board link. If we get nonsense, I now won't be surprised. I'll correct things quickly. I know how to do this now. I'll just step back, change the address, get back on, and then one-on-one, when I know you, I'll give you access and others will just watch. So hopefully there'll be no nonsense. It will just weaken it, but it won't stop us. Okay, so here's how you do this. Each row represents one challenge. Okay, so all you do is you click this, and let go. Okay, so I click this, I let go. I now hold it again and I drag it over. Okay. And then you can click it again and type something in. Okay, now I'm going to do Control Z, Control Z. I've always liked Control Z, but once I learned Miro, I like Control Z better. That undoes something. So what you can start doing now is simply, in your mind, think of something, pick a row nobody's in yet. Do not conflate people with rows. I don't want 2 people working on the same row, except there is one way. I mean, not in the red part. So in the red part, one person puts the challenge in. Now, if you have a challenge that's virtually the same, but you want to word it differently, then you could have 2 reds in the same place. To do that is you can click it, you do Control C, and then Control Z. I told you I like Control Z. Control C, then move it where you want it, and Control V. So you can do that if it's the same. If you want to, if somebody puts something here So I just, actually, that's the easiest way. Just touch it and move it over. Well, Miro's a little inconsistent to me. You can also drag a black dot on, which would mean, hey, I got that problem too. Or a white dot meaning I got something like that, but not exactly that. Okay, so go ahead and start doing. I'm going to do this. We're going to give you about 5 minutes to start. Ask me questions. You can unmute if you want to. Again, no nonsense. I'll leave that off. I mean, I'll leave that ability. We're going to do 5 minutes now. Just try this. See what's going on. The cool things about boards, one thing I've learned is you can never give good enough instructions. It's just the way it is. So when I run these things, what I like to do is just run them for a couple of minutes, see how people are doing it. Don't make them wrong, because ultimately it's my setup of the board and my poor explanation that causes a problem. At least that's the attitude I take. And then just see, but it looks like you guys are doing great. And then remember, if you want to, anybody can add into the subsequent columns if they want to, like how you can overcome it. So if you see somebody else saying there's a problem and you see how to overcome it, feel free to put something on that row. But otherwise, the reds are just one per. That gives us the ability to go across the board in a consistent way. Here, I'm going to come back. I just wanted to check something. And if you have questions, you could put it in the chat or unmute yourself. I have given that ability. Is good. Yeah, and after you've done one, why don't you try to take yours across a little bit, but also take a little time to look at other people. Okay, we're doing good. I'm just going to let this running because I'm watching what's going on. I put the 5 minute mark up there. Well, I'll stop at 5 to talk, but this still looks pretty good. You can see how it's pretty easy to do this stuff, which is also good. Okay, why don't you wrap up what you're doing? Don't add any more. Just pause. Let me finish what's there. And you can come off mute if you like. Comments? You raise your hand or just chime in. No comments? I like how things are going.
As I was working with it, one thing I found myself doing was jumping between this view and the mindset view. I think it's great that's there because that helps people come back to, why are we, what's working or what's not, what's the reasons behind it, right? That board 4 there. I can look at the principles, I can look at the factors to come back to it. And I realized that as someone who's, some of the people I work with would be less, this is a good change because some of the people I work with would be less trained and less experienced in terms of, they wouldn't know how to proceed past the first square.
Yeah, it's kind of nice actually. And this is one of the reasons the side view is nice, because if you have that up there, then you could be working on the challenges board and jump straight to the mindset. I wonder if there's a better way to integrate those two than this. I'll think about that. And if anybody has an idea, that'd be good. But that is part of the idea. And this is one of the big differences between Scrum, which uses empiricism alone. I mean, I like empiricism. I mean, it's funny. It's not like, who doesn't use empiricism? It's actually empirical process control, by the way. Of course, you see what's going on. Of course, you look and you adapt to it. The question is, do you also add theory to it? And, Deming, to paraphrase him, says, theory without experience is useless. Experience without theory is expensive. So by being able to go back and forth, we're starting to look to see, why are these things happening? Now, some of the reason may simply because the people are antagonistic, people are resistant or something like that. But it's worth knowing. It's worth knowing that these are kind of rules. This is what we call first principles. These are how the world works. I didn't make these up. I observed them. And I don't know if I should hate or not hate or be embarrassed or not be embarrassed. These are always changing on me as I learn. In fact, just the other day, I actually adjusted these factors for effective value streams. I made a way to be more inclusive and clearer. So I adjusted them. This is an ongoing, how do you learn about the way your assumptions are and learn how to learn? This should be what Agile is about. So I'm not really embarrassed that I change them, because that means I'm learning something. I make them simpler to understand and better to use. Again, that literally happened last night. I decided I needed this clarity on what success is to key stakeholders. If you don't know this, you're not going to have effective value streams because you're not going to be building things. And I try to keep it to a limit of 10. So I combined, which I'd always thought should be anyway, keep work visible, and the way it's being worked explicit, which makes it visible. So good. That's a good point. Good observation. By the way, I don't know I'm going to do this, but maybe I will. I created this other board, which is not really part of the challenges board, but let me show it to you. And then as we go on, if you want to kind of play with this board as well, you can. This table, what this table is how well are the vectors for effective value streams being done? In other words, these are those 10 that, right down here, these numbers. See, like avoid overload, that's avoid overload. Okay, see, it's the same. And what this is now not looking at your challenges in particular, but just in general. This is what I use as a consultant or coach. I'll go in and I'll look at their value streams and I'll say, well, do we know what success means? Are we working on the most important things and are we delivering quickly? That's again, basically right here. And I just realized I didn't change this depth. I have to fix that. I fixed this. I made a mistake here. I'll fix that. But this is a way to go in. See, because to me, a scrum master or a team lead who's attending to what's going on needs to be part consultant and be able to analyze this. So we're going to, any other comments, and then we'll pick back up. Questions? Okay. So what I want you to do is we're just going to go a couple more minutes, about another 5 minutes. We're just going to cycle through this. We're about halfway through. I want to get a little more up. If you're happy with this, let's see, tables are kind of cool because I have it locked because I find people accidentally break it. So what I'm going to do is add a couple more rows because you guys are great. This is really awesome. And I'm going to copy these. So I add a few more rows. Remember, 1 row per challenge. What you should do in the next 5 minutes, we're going to keep taking these little breaks like this. I'm going to go back and make this lock. See, now I've locked this table down. What I want you to do over the next 5 minutes is keep working in here a little bit. Feel free. And again, since we're all being well behaved, I'm going to copy the board link again. I noticed some people came up late. Sometimes it's actually interesting to just watch anyway, but so keep adding some things here. Try to go to the right. Maybe look to see what things are being violated by going, remember, mindset, challenges board. And if you're really bold, how well are the factors for effective value stream? Play with this a little bit. Remember, this board is not about particular challenges. This board is you go in and you look at the value stream and how it's being done. I actually haven't used this too much. I came up with this part here because that seemed particularly useful. And then I realized, oh, this would be cool too, for the same reason you just mentioned, Andrew. Okay, so another 5 minutes. At any time, if you want to talk, just raise your hand and we could do that. This is meant to be interactive more, but I like people to try things out. So got another 5 minutes and we'll come back and chat. And I made that by mistake. Oh, and don't forget to use the black dots and white dots. If you have something similar, review what this is. Oh, and fill in these that I added some rows, but there's some gaps here. Yeah, Sid, you're on mute.
Hi.
Great.
So I guess one question I have is how often, what is the cadence of doing these exercises? Because I mean, the world is non-linear, right? One moment you think the value has changed and your systems have changed. So what is the cadence of these things?
That's a great question. I'm going to stop the timer because I want to answer this question. Okay, because this is really important. And there are actually 3 or 4 learning methods that I like to use on a team. So, we talk about batching and, batching of work. And we talk about how that's not bad. And waterfall really batches big and Scrum batches middle, week to week. That's not that bad. But I like flow model. But what we forget is that what we're really trying to do, it's not just CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous development. What we're really trying to do is continuous learning. And this idea of batching and having a long cadence is a bad thing in my mind. Yet, sometimes you get so involved, you need a time to say, hey, we're taking a break, we're looking at something. So we want to recognize there are 2 or 3 things going on here. One is, as I'm working on a day-to-day basis, the way I've done it is I don't do the daily scrum the way most people do. If I've got enough people I can trust, because sometimes you're new and you don't quite trust them. And not that they're evil people, they just don't have the maturity or aren't totally engaged. So if you need that, the daily scrum is a good thing, or any kind of daily stand-up, whatever you want to call it, is a good thing for saying, hey, here's what's going on. Don't use the questions about here's what I did. Do like, well, here's what we did. Here's what we're working on. Here's what the challenge is. Be inclusive. That's helpful. And that's in one of my books. I'll talk about that toward the end. But the best thing in my mind is you make an agreement. If a problem comes up, I'm going to communicate to somebody I think who could help me, or I'll let the group know if I don't know who that is, and we'll solve it immediately. And in that case, something comes up, you try to solve it right away. And I still schedule daily meetings because maybe nobody has time, and then we know we're just not dropping it out. So when I run a team, I almost never do a daily scrum because I will catch the problem right away. I'll see the blockage and we'll take the opportunity to pivot on a continual basis. But the daily scrum's there because just as a checklist, and we always do one, even if we don't think we needed a week. In other words, if we haven't had one because we've caught them all, well, at the end of the week, we'll do one just to, hey guys, let's talk. Okay, now that's not what this is for, but sometimes a lot of things that happen won't get on this board because we handle them in that continual way. This is kind of a retrospective. And as I mentioned, you could use this if you want, instead of instead of the normal after action reviews. Like this is how at Net Objectives, we use this one at Net Objectives. That's the company I had from 99 to 2019 before I sold my IP to the PMI. And then last year, a couple of years ago, I left the PMI and started Success Engineering. So this would be a retrospective. So I have this here. We're going to do this in another month or so and give this away. But is this better way of finding what we want as a retro, or is this better? So I kind of use this more as a retrospective. And then the question is how often? Okay. And I would do this again, probably weekly or in the middle of the sprint if I'm using Thai boxing, like if you have a sprint. It's kind of funny. I don't believe retros at the end of the sprint are the best time for this. I got this from John Ward. He has, I forget the name of his approach. It's really good. And I've written about it. He's written, John Ward, you can find him on LinkedIn. And he suggested you do the retros in the middle of the sprint. And there are two reasons for it. If you do it in the middle of the sprint, you can make a change in the sprint and get some savings. Another reason, if you do it in the middle of the sprint, is that at the end of the sprint, people don't really want to do a retro. If you've been successful, it's like, hey, let's just celebrate and what we did great. And if you weren't successful, you don't want to talk about it. It's what I joke about. Ben Franklin said, beer is evidence that God loves us. And one of the things that's funny about that to me is think about it. If you've had a really bad sprint and you're really morose, beer is great. You've had a great sprint and you really are happy, beer's great. Happy or not, I'm just kidding. And I apologize if I'm insulting anybody's thing about beer, but here's one last thing I want to talk about. And then we'll go back to doing this. Just a second.
Sorry, Al, can I just add a...
Yeah, please.
I don't want to take too much time. I guess another way of phrasing my question is, in your own cybernetics terminology, you talk about single and double loop learning. Many of these things are effectively single loop learning, but sometimes your mental model of what the users actually, the value required to them has changed because the competitor has changed.
That's right.
The world has changed. So when do you do the double loop and triple loop? Because all of this feels like single loop. Maybe I'm incorrect, but yeah.
No, well, actually, this is single loop learning. So here, let me show one other thing, and then let me get to that, because I said you're just asking awesome questions, but I want you to notice something else. Notice how the board is prompting these things. Notice how we're having conversations, not just about what our challenges are. We're having conversations about how do we learn, how do we approach it. This is brilliant. This is what you want. You don't want to be following a guide. What you want to be doing is following something that's bringing and evoking these things and these conversations. So let me show you this, and then I'll jump to single loop, and then we'll go back. So no need to apologize. This is exactly the kind of learning we want and what we want to be engaged in. And this is what accelerates things. So here's just something I noticed. See, if you have you have a sprint and you do your retro at the end of the sprint, then something that started, you notice it early, but you don't fix it. These could have been fixed, but they weren't. What happens is you just keep having errors. See, if you detect them as quickly as possible, early detection can lead to prevention is the idea. We talk about preventing errors. Well, that's great. To be candid, I can't always prevent errors, but I can detect them quickly. This is one of the values of automated testing, is if you find it instantly, the developer pretty much knows the last thing they did broke it. That's not always the case, but it often is. So when you do it in the end of a sprint, you have this. When you do it in the middle of the sprint, you have that. Now, what Sid's referring to, I always get. And this to me is this book, by the way, that I'm in here. You can get these books. They're free, they're online, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to make them Creative Commons. We're having a conversation. I have a train the trainer program called ACES, Amplio Community of Practice, Amplio Consultant Educators, and we're talking about what we want to give away. And I think the books are one of them. So if you go to the Success Engineering Resources books, there are these books, Amplio Development, Being an Effective Value Creation Coach. The Scrum Guide gives some background, but it's not really complete, may not ever get complete. But what we've got here we go, single. Okay, so, and this is something you really should know. I did not come up with these concepts. Chris Argyris was one of the big guys, came up with what he calls double loop learning. Single loop learning is like this. We're taking what we know and we're doing it better. Single loop learning is like we have our theories, like let's say we have the Scrum theory or whatever it is. We do something, we get results, we improve it. Okay, that's what the first 3 columns were about. But double loop learning says, hey, maybe we should question our assumptions. Maybe we're having a problem because we're doing time boxing. Maybe we should be using flow. So we're challenging the assumptions we've made and trying to do better. This is one of the problems with empiricism alone. It just really enhances our habits and doesn't have us question what is the thought process we're doing. And it's that questioning of the thought process that's really critical. Now, triple loop learning. Oh, and here's just one other point. Triple loop learning takes it, just look at this left one right now. Triple loop learning says, how do we improve our questioning of our assumptions? So single loop learning is basically enforces our habits. Double loop learning questions our habits. And triple loop learning is how do we learn how to question our habits better? This is getting out of our echo chamber. Actually, double loop learning is kind of getting out of the echo chamber. And I have this right here, just plan, do, study, adjust means we're creating a model, whereas inspect and adapt is pretty much just on this. Inspect and adapt doesn't have us challenge the assumptions of Scrum. If we did, we would not be doing Scrum anymore. Okay, so does this answer it? So the problem is when our heads are down, we're almost always just doing single loop learning. The daily Scrum is a way to kind of question and stop where we are. And if we challenge what we're doing, that's a good thing too. And then triple loop learning is something that I would schedule. So we would have a schedule like once a week. Hey, let's see what's going on. Are we right about this? That does take pulling back more. Okay. And I like to say everyone has echo chambers, but no, I have echo chambers. Knowing that you have an echo chamber doesn't affect the echo chamber. You've got to do something about it. Like just a couple of days ago, I have a couple buddies in Novavi. They're really brilliant, Horia and Aldo. And the running joke, as I've known them for 3 or 4 years, is Aldo tells me what I missed and Horia tells me what I got wrong. And we laugh about it. I mean, I'm not kidding. They do. I mean, it's a conversation won't go by without Aldo saying, well, you should look at this. And he's a little maybe nicer. Horia is nice too. It's just he's a little, I like that he's blunt. And he says, Al, you're wrong here. And I say, you're right, Horia. Good. Thank you for pointing that out. So I learned something. So you want to get yourself involved where you have people who challenge you. And in a team, this is hard if there's not safety. And that's where the other advantage of boards like this. Look at this. Who did what? It's hard to tell. There's safety here. This is a different kind of communication than face-to-face. I wrote a post recently. Yeah, I know why they said face-to-face in the Agile Manifesto. And at the time, it was useful to say that. Because back then we were using all these requirements documents. One of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill is he worked on a tank requirements document. And he said, this document by its very size defends itself from ever being read. So you didn't want that type of documentation. But notice this type of communication is many to many. And also notice, say somebody's not on the team. This opens up asynchronous communication. I said, is your hand still up or is that a new question?
Yes, I just wanted to add one point which I
Please.
found useful for psychological safety is, I think it was Gary Klein who invented a pre-mortem. Once you do a pre-mortem, people, that's the goal of the system right now. The goal of the system is to kill whatever is going to happen. And then people are encouraged to come up. So I found that that encourages psychological safety a lot.
I love you brought that up. We have a mirror board for the pre-mortem by Gary Klein.
Oh, okay.
The moment you said Gary Klein, I said, yes. See, the thing about having a mural board like this, and I'll pull it up a little later as you work, but having a mural board for the pre-mortem, a pre-mortem creates psychological safety because normally you're a little afraid to tell the manager he's full of it and this is doomed for failure. Oh my goodness, I'm not going to tell him that. So what you do is you have the person in charge say, we want to see what's wrong. he requests information about what's going wrong. So now he's asking you to tell him what's going wrong. And in doing so, you're doing what he wants. It's a safe environment. So challenges, I'm really glad you brought that up. So these boards can be safe, not just because they're anonymous when you put them on, but they can be safe because they're designed to be that way. And you're starting to see there's a different kind of communication. There's what I also call asynchronous communication. Say somebody on the team isn't able to get to this, they can come back later, right? And they could look at this and they could keep working on it and add things. In fact, a scrum master or somebody like that, any kind of coach could come back and kind of add to columns 4 and 5. Okay, so I've been talking a bit too much, but this is great. This is you getting the idea anyway, whether we have done a lot. So I'm going to pick up the timer. Go ahead, try to work more to the right if you can, and you don't need to. You can stay on 1, 2, and 3 columns. And if anybody's seriously bold, go out to the factors for effective value streams. Oh, sorry, that's my problem. There we go. I was just going out to the Amplio community practice you can join. These were some of the mural boards we had there. In fact, the pre-mortem and cafe conversation are out there. How to do a pre-mortem. This is a board you could get and download and use if you join the Amplio community practice community on Thinkific, which is free. And I blended it with another board called the Cafe Conversation, where you could literally do this with dozens and dozens of people. So I just wanted to verify that it was in fact out there. And there are other boards we do. Yeah, we have about 5 or 6, and I'm adding one a month. Lean Coffee, the analysis matrix, this is really cool. Okay, anyway, keep going. Oh, really good. The marketing reported for quantity of leads, not quality. Oh, I got to find this article I wrote. This is awesome. This is, do you prefer Andy or Andrew?
I am an Andrew. There might be Andys here as well.
Yeah, I was referring to you, Andrew. Yeah, that's a great question. In the chat, he put asynchronous communication has benefits, but it also can cause contextual problems. There are 2 kinds of contextual problems, and I think you're referring to the one where somebody put something in kind of what did they mean, and you could immediately ask, and that's a good question. Then what you have to do is recognize that's a problem. The other contextual problem is how is this whole thing, what's the context within which this is being done, which is relatively straightforward to address. So yeah, I'm not saying asynchronous communication is better than face-to-face. There's obviously that immediate dialogue. That's a good thing. but it's a nice vehicle, added vehicle for it. Okay, so I wanted to show something else I could do. See, like right here, I love this marketing rewarded for quantity of leads, not quality. This little guy here is a comment. I added a comment here, and I pull it up. And the reason I added this is, and this is what's cool, because we don't necessarily need to go here, but I actually wrote something about this. I want Scott using value stream mapping. It's one of the reasons I'm a big fan. In 2006, it was my very first lean software development course I ran. And in there, we did some value stream mapping, and the people went back to their company without me, and they got a 100-person development group get an increase of 20% in productivity without touching the development group. Because what happens is sometimes you'll find that where you think the problem is isn't where the problem is. So what we're doing here is we're kind of gathering information. Now, look, it's been 47 minutes on the clock. We started actually a couple of minutes late. It's been 45 minutes on the clock. But do you realize we've done all this in 10 minutes? To get that, all this is 10 minutes of work. I've been talking most of the time. Now, the first time you do this, it might take you an hour to go through the way I've gone through. Just let them watch this video because this is being recorded. It goes into our library. But you see how effective this is because it's this simultaneously. So we have now 3 types of communication, not just face-to-face. We also have synchronous communication, everybody working together, and asynchronous communication later. So Sid, this goes back to your question about timing, that this isn't an event and it's over. See, now as a coach, I can come in here and know these are the problems. I can see why people think they aren't being solved, rather, why people think or how people think they can be solved, why people think they can't be solved. And I could go in, if I'm the more experienced person, talk about the principles and then have a follow-up for 15 or 20 minutes. Like, here's what's going on. So this becomes a living document in that sense. So you actually have 3 paces going on here. One is, when do you get it kicked off? See, we don't do this from scratch every time. This becomes a document. Now we just keep updating every time. The other thing we do is we give a time frame. We say, hey guys, if I'm in a multinational, multi-time zone, doesn't have to be multinational, multi-time zone, is I can go and say, hey, we just did this, try to look at it in the next 40 hours, we'll come back. So then there's a on your own kind of cadence. Notice we don't need as much of a meeting about it, but if you've got something like Zoom or Slack or Microsoft Teams, if I'm not sure about something, we can have point-to-point conversations. This enables for that as well. So it's really this living document idea is what's important. That was lost when the impediment. For those who came in a few minutes late, I said, what gave me this idea was back, see, I've been doing Scrum since around 2000, 2001. I'll be candid, I got into Scrum when I couldn't get people to adopt XP. I got some people to adopt XP. I was doing XP training in 2000, 2001 with some of I wasn't part of the organization that was present then, but I definitely was promoting it and teaching it. And I found a lot of people didn't want to do paired programming, didn't want to do, that was the real hurdle, and didn't want to do the upfront testing. So if you drop the technical practices from XP, you get pretty close to Scrum, at least back in the day. Now it's a lot different because XP has moved forward in a lot of areas that Scrum hasn't. But the idea being that you want whoever is being your coach to know a little bit more than the rest of the team, not so they can tell them what to do, but so they can guide them. And that's what value is here. Okay. So that's a great concept. And you're right. That's a great idea, between you and Andrew, that I'm going to improve this board. Perhaps acknowledge the possible loss of context and create a separate structure to capture miscellaneous context. That's really good. Because
I'm pondering it, Sid. It's a neat idea, and I'm also balancing, like, at some point you create too many superstructures. I want to.
You could.
I already want to lapse it back. Musk's message of Tesla, like, don't make the thing. Make as few things as possible.
That's right. That's right.
So, but there's a good tension to have. I'm not saying no. I'm just saying,
Well, let me actually speak to that just for a minute, because in other words, you can get too much, or you could have too little. There are 2 ways I try to solve the problem. One is I'm not creating things that people have to follow, but I will create things that are useful as checklists. Okay. the Checklist Manifesto, I think is what it was called, by the, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. You look to see, by Atul Gawande. Is he the same guy who wrote Anti-Fragile? Who wrote that? No, that was Nassim Nicholas Taleb. Yeah, but in the Checklist Manifesto, it's like a checklist. It's not like, oh, I got to do all these things, but it's kind of like, what are the things I forget? I got into checklists when I used to do lots and lots of consulting. I still do, but I don't do as much as I used to. And what would happen is I'd be in a place, I'm very fast on my feet, quick on my feet when I make an error. And I try to be totally authentic, but I'll admit here, maybe I wasn't. So what would happen is I'd be in at a place and I'd be talking about what to look at. And somebody said, Al, what about this? And I would say, yeah, I was just getting to that. And I was really saying, rats, I need to write this down to make sure I cover those things. So that's kind of what a checklist is, So the design of these things, and I'm saying this because you can design your own mirror boards, is you have this thing and you have this thing, and like Andrew's saying, there can be some tension, I get too much. So the question is, you try to resolve them, but in a way that doesn't add complexity. And that is often difficult. That often takes a lot of thinking. We talk about simple. It's not the design that needs to be simple under the covers, it's how it's used. So it might take a long time to figure out how to resolve this issue. Now, the other way to do it is you don't resolve the issue, that you actually keep adding, but then you add it in layers. So you can have the central part, see, like I did here. See, I could have just talked about this and not even mentioned this. But then when people get more adept, then you go to a little bit more involved. The idea is, I'm going to suggest something here, Andrew. I totally agree with you. You want to focus on things. But the other thing is sometimes you want to go deeper. The question is, how do you go deeper? If there's an intelligent way to go deeper, the guiding factor is don't lose focus and don't overload people, not have a simple solution, or not have less material. But those are good. This whole conversation is good, and it's good guidance for me to add some stuff here. Especially, Susan knows, she's known me a long time. I tend to overdo. I have to pull myself back because I know so many things from doing this for 26 years. It's like, man, I can overload you. It's why I actually have these things I call learning journeys.
Sorry, Al, can I just add maybe another different mental model is to, if everything is going great, your structure is adequate. If things are not going great, start to add more, start to then see, okay, maybe we'll add a little more structure and see, does that change it?
That's right.
Work backwards and say, if everything's really growing great, there's nothing to fix, just, so if Elon Musk is able to build his car without any structure, then everything's going great. But once the situation has changed, he needs a CEO to actually get things to work. And now he needs more structure. So it's very context dependent whether you need structure or not, I think.
I agree. Actually, somehow, I put the drawing tool up. Okay, here we go. I agree. It's kind of like the model I like to think about this is, if you look at Wikipedia, I like how they're laid out. They kind of follow this. You come in, you get a nice focus a little bit, but then if you want to go down and learn more, you can do that. So it's, how do you unravel that? Okay. So I've actually gone far enough with what I intended here. If you're in the Amplio community practice, this recording will be available within 24 hours. And by Amplio community practice, I mean go to learnsuccessmentorsu.com. Okay, and you could register for the ACOP for free. So it doesn't cost anything, doesn't ask for a credit card, it's all free. I do have other workshops. I was going to point these out in case people are interested. If you go to Success Engineering, I'm in as the admin here, but let's see, that's easy enough to just come into the site. If you want to see what I do, I have basically about 5 levels of things. The Amplio COP is free. The Amplio Development Masterclass is an advanced workshop that starts from scratch, but will take you into how to handle multiple teams, including, I call it BLAST, basically an Agile Solution Team, but it's broader than Nexus. I actually predates Nexus, so I'm not copying it, but it's something I'd learned to do in the late 2000s. Amplio Team is a brand new workshop. It's It's basically how does a team work? Amplio Development Masterclass includes Amplio Team Plus sessions to do multiple teams. If you're really interested in getting like the Train the Trainer program or a really elite consultant, that's what the Amplio Consultant Educators. This is something we run 3 times a month. And I've got this long list of stuff being taught. All these programs, by the way, are ongoing. This one's just ongoing. The others are, you pay for it year in a year. The material, the workshop is usually over 2 or 3 months, but then you get to stay in for questions and review the material since everything's recorded. And the Value Stream Coach is a advanced course for people who have taken something like the Discipline Agile Value Stream Coach or Consultant Workshop. It's kind of fills in the gaps of the PMI's DAVSC. Okay. So we have just a few more minutes. I do invite you to investigate those, ask me questions, join the Amplio community practice because it's free. That's really what this is. These are the ACOP sessions. Once a month, I do a mural board that I give away. Like I said, that'll be in there in the next day as well. If you have a mural license, you can download it and use it. And then every 2 weeks, the other 2 weeks, I do events once a month. I call this an event because we're kind of interactive. In the presentation, I'm going to talk about being an effective value creation coach. This is based on that book of the same title. These are free, they're online. They're not 100% done, but the book this is based on is about 95% done, and the Amplio development's about 90% done. I still have a few chapters to fill in. Okay, so I'm done with the sales pitch and the wrap up. Any questions, any other questions? We still have a few more minutes. We all good? Well, this board is...
Can I ask a quick question now?
Yeah, let me actually make one last comment. I'm leaving this board up here, so you can go in and keep playing with it. You can show it to people. I'm not taking it down, just done using it here. Okay, yeah, Sid.
So assume you have all this structure, right? And I guess related to Andrew's question here, right? There's sort of a chicken and egg problem here is someone, when they look at this, they have to be convinced that it delivers. They have to have the belief that this delivers value to then honestly do the exercise and then see the outcome of it. But if they don't even believe that this exercise can deliver value, then they will not invest enough effort. So how do you get that? It feels like you have a chicken and egg problem here where you need some buy-in, that people are convinced that this exercise actually delivers value. Have you encountered that?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. It's a really good question in general. How do you get people to do things? I haven't encountered this for the reason that when I've been brought in, I've been kind of given the credibility to do it because as a consultant or in my training, people are learning it as a tool. If I was in a situation where I was like a coach for a team that they didn't think this had value, then I would probably just start doing this on my own. I would just create a board, fill it out based on what people tell me and things I add, and then just let people know, hey, I'm doing this to track what's there. Go ahead and take a look. This is another kind of safety, by the way. In other words, they might be willing to look at it for 5 minutes with acknowledging maybe you know something they don't. See, this is actually, I've been meaning to write this up. I may have written it up in the coaching book, but I forgot and I'll check. The biggest fear people have is not from their manager. It's not from the space they're in. It's not from their peers. It's the between the ears. It's what they think of themselves. And the reason the safe environment is needed is because if you don't have one, that'll trigger, oh, I'm worthless. Oh, the self-doubt we give ourselves is most of the time much more strong than anything else. So Sid, they may not even want to admit there's a possibility that you know more than they do. So this is a good question though, because I'm going to write this up because I think that's brilliant to ask that question. I haven't faced it directly, but that's how I would solve it when I did face it if I was on a team.
Now, can I offer one suggestion too? How I work in this space?
Yeah, please. Yeah,
so
that'd be great.
With teams, sometimes when I'm bringing an idea they don't know about and they're tense about it, I try to frame it as an experiment. Let's try. Would you entertain? And so I'll acknowledge that I'm overtaking. I'm imposing on their sense of self. Would you entertain an experiment? And I'll bound and time bound it, for 30 minutes, we'll try this, or for 2 weeks, we'll do it this way. And at the end, I want your feedback, and I promise up front, we'll drop it like a rock if you don't see value in it. And therefore I'm trying to work to leave them in control and to introduce an idea from that they can explore and they can critique, and it puts them again sort of on top. So that's one tool that I've found helpful. But I also like your idea too of pre-populating the beast, so that then someone can say, "Oh, it was a blank slate. It was frightening to me to see that big open space, but now I see a couple things in there. Let me add something else."
Yeah. It's
Awesome.
often good when you start this is to precede it as well, so they get it, because having a couple of things in there that you know they will relate to enables them to see examples. And so preceding it, not like what I was talking about, is just kind of doing it in parallel and slowly getting them in. If you're going to do it as an event, even in the way you talk about, Andrew, it might be worth putting a couple up there so they can see an example. That helps a lot on the instructions. There's one other way to do what you just said. The way I like to frame it, I sometimes call this, hey, can we have a conversation for possibility? Like, we don't really know what's going to happen. Like you say, time box it to 30 minutes. And I add one other thing to it. I say, we're making no commitment that comes out of this. So I'm not saying, let's try this, and if we like it, we'll go forward. Because then they're like, well, maybe I don't want to, there's a little bit of commitment that. So I say, we will decide at the end if we want to do anything. So it's kind of what you said. I'm just putting maybe a little edge on it to say that we want to make it clear that there's absolutely no commitment at all here. Okay, this is good. I hope you learned something. You guys gave me some great suggestions. I'll work it in. And like I said, I'll put this out on the community practice.